Hello, so we're going to be looking at chapter 11 today on heroines, and there are two chapters on heroines. Um, Mahany has a rather rigid way of presenting stuff, but which I'm not going to go into. We're not going to look at the quest heroines, the figures that appear in chapter 13, although you certainly can read that material. We're going to look at heroines now in this chapter, and it's going to specifically look at the figure of Medea. But first of all, the Maurizio does the same thing with the heroines that she does with the heroes. In other words, she looks at the 5 things that are typical of heroines. You know, they've died, there's a shrine to them, blah, 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 blah. Again, that's great as a sociological thing or an anthropological thing. It is not great as a literary thing. Because in a piece of literature, you're looking at a figure in a story, right? If you're looking at Star Wars Episode 4, A New Hope, which when I saw it originally, it was just Star Wars. There was only that one movie. You don't see Luke Skywalker's whole life. You see Luke Skywalker's life in a very small section, right? You see basically his life over the period of like a couple of months. That's it. And you can talk about him in that work as a hero who he grows into being a hero. The other stuff wouldn't really apply. So again, you know, Maurizio is going to say that stuff. Don't put too much weight on it. It is true in the larger scheme, but when we're looking at characters in a piece of literature, I would argue that it does not work well. I'm going to use a different scheme from a different mythology book, one that I used to use by Stephen Harris and Gloria Platzner. And they divided heroines into 5 types, 5 sort of paths that the heroine might take. One was as wife of the hero or mother of the hero. And this is the most usual, or the one that is socially approved, because wife and mother are the socially approved roles for women. The sidekick is generally is a tomboy figure who will eventually choose to be the wife or the mother of a hero, but we see the figure in their youth when they're hanging around with heroes, and they themselves are acting sort of like heroes' helpers. And it's okay for them to do that, but once they become of marriageable age, once they get a little bit older, then they're supposed to be looking at the more socially approved path. The Bride of Death would be a heroine who dies rather than gets married. And this could be someone who doesn't want to marry, right, wants to remain a virgin, but it could also be someone who has to choose death, or just the situation falls to them that they die. So Iphigenia, the daughter of Agamemnon, who gets sacrificed so that the Greeks can go to Troy, that it is an instance of a bride of death, right? She either has chosen, or maybe she didn't choose, but she's going to die rather than be married. The hero impersonator is when a heroine acts as a hero. In other words, does a male hero's job even though the heroine is female. So this is sort of crossing those culturally determined gender boundaries. The successful heroine is going to show some qualities of the hero impersonator. They're going to very much act on their own. They're going to be very smart. They're going to be very clever. They're going to be very strong, maybe. But ultimately, what they do is sort of, going to back them up in their role, usually as wife or mother of hero or intended of the hero. So they will go back to their roles. The successful heroine, in the 1940s, there were lots of movies where you have a female lead and the woman actually is very much like a man. She's doing basically a man's job. She, of course, is not recognized by the male authorities as being legit, but she does all the sort of heroic things, but she does it ultimately with a view towards subordinated herself to to patriarchy in the end. The main hero in chapter 11 is the figure of Medea. So the selection comes from Euripides' play Medea, and specifically the Agon scene in that play. Now, first of all, a little bit about Medea. Medea is a princess from Colchis. This is in the far eastern part of what the Greeks would know. It's the eastern side of the Black Sea. This was considered wild and savage by the Greeks, so it's outside civilization. Jason has to go there to get the Golden Fleece. He gets the Golden Fleece, and with the help of Medea, who disobeys her father in helping Jason, and then she runs away with Jason. But eventually things go wrong, and Jason sees an opportunity for advancement, and so he is going to divorce Medea to marry the princess of Corinth. This will get him the throne that he should have had, right? Because he was the son of a king, but that king was overthrown. But he didn't get that throne ultimately because Medea killed the guy who took the throne from Jason's father. And so because of the murder, he can't then become the king of that community. So Jason has his own sort of issues at work when they get to Corinth, and then when he sees an opportunity to advance, he takes it. Of course, Medea does not like this. Now, the play basically deals with Medea and Jason in Corinth, and the Agon scene, which is a key scene in the play. An Agon is any sort of contest, but when we're talking about Euripides, the Agon is a rhetorical contest, a debate. Euripides, of the three great tragedians, is the one who is most critical of Athens, and specifically of Athens' educational system. The equivalent of college in Athens in Euripides' day was that you would study under a rhetorical teacher, a sophist, and you would learn how to speak well. Now, it's a democracy, and obviously in a democracy where the assembly decides, if you can speak well, you can convince the assembly, and then you can get your way, right? So the way to power is actually being able to speak well. Euripides has a problem with that, because speaking well does not mean speaking the truth, right? You can learn to be a great liar, and if you're successful at being a great liar, then you're going to have people behind you. But is that right? And Euripides, I think, would argue, no, it is not. That the truth matters, and that, slickness in presentation, not so much. So in this debate, you've got Jason, who represents basically the sort of slick speaker. He definitely, makes his arguments sound plausible. Medea is not trained in rhetoric and does not argue well from the perspective of slickness. She's way too emotional, but she has facts on her side. So that's what we've got in this Agon, this debate. And Euripides, clearly, his sympathies are with Medea, as far as this debate goes. She wins the debate from his perspective. She's the last one to speak. And in all the other plays, and he wrote a bunch of plays. We have 19 of his plays. Probably in 10 of them there's a debate scene. So he uses the debate scene a lot. And in all the other debate scenes, the one who speaks last is the one who wins the debate. So from Euripides' perspective, Medea is the winner because she presents facts, even though Jason sounds better. And in a modern debate context, who knows who would win, because partly presentation is one of the things you get scored on. So, and an Athenian audience might be sympathetic to Jason anyways because he's the male and he's Greek, whereas Medea is foreign and she's woman. But at any rate, that's the setup. So that Agon scene, so appreciate what's sort of going on there. Now, we also get the comparison section, looks at Medea in Ovid's Metamorphoses. And this tells more of Medea's story. Interestingly, Ovid leaves out, or really shrinks to almost nothing, the whole Corinth section of Medea's story. He deals with the stuff before, he deals with the stuff after. Partly that's because he himself wrote a play about Medea, which does not survive, which is interesting because we have a lot of Ovid. We have more of Ovid than of almost any other ancient Roman author, like as far as just amount. But the Medea, his Medea, which the ancients say was the best thing he wrote, we don't have. So go figure. I mean, it's a lot of survival of ancient Roman and Greek literature is a crapshoot. We're just lucky that we have what we have. But for the Romans, for Ovid and for Seneca, who did write a Medea play, which is based on Euripides' play, and then in opera, and when Medea comes back in Italian opera, Medea is basically seen as an emotional figure, and emotions are suspect for the Romans, right? Emotions are not seen as a good thing for government. For governments to work, you need to be able to dispassionately discuss the issues and try to come at a sensible solution. If you're giving into emotional excess, then you're not going to do that. You're going to be all caught up in your emotions. And so that's really what Medea's, the purpose that she serves for the Romans. The Nachleben section of chapter 11 deals with Margaret Garner, Peggy Garner. She was called the modern Medea in the 1850s when her story was told, and then it was sort of retold after the Civil War. And her story serves as the basis for Toni Morrison's Beloved. So Margaret Garner was a slave who escaped from Kentucky. And of course, Kentucky's right across the Ohio River from Ohio. And so it was fairly easy to escape from Kentucky, right? It's one of the northern of the southern states, so you can easily cross into the north. And Toni Morrison grew up in Lorain, Ohio, which is near Cincinnati. So a lot of these stories would have been known to her as local stories. She was caught, but before her captors could actually, take hold of her and sort of arrest her and send her back to slavery in Kentucky, she managed to kill her daughter, who I think was an infant, but was at least very young. Now, there's a painting which is reproduced in the book, and that served as a lithograph in the Saturday Evening Post, I think it was. So it was like a lot of people saw the lithograph at least. In it, you've got these three horrified white guys looking on at this woman who's angry, and her kids seem to be, begging and pleading with her. And then there's clearly a dead kid who's male, not female, but a dead kid on the ground, on the floor. And we look at the story, and of course the newspaper people of the time saw a comparison with Medea, and it's easy for us to criticize Peggy Garner, Margaret Garner, for killing her daughter, right? Which is a horrific thing for a parent to kill a child. But keep in mind, the child that she did kill was a girl child. It is likely that most of the children that Peggy Garner had, maybe not all of them, but some of them at least, were the result of her being raped by the master. And the likelihood is that her daughter, when her daughter grew up, and maybe didn't grow up very, very far. I mean, maybe, she at 10 or 11, she could easily get raped. So it is quite possible that Margaret Garner's thinking was, death is better than that. And so I'm going to kill this child so that child doesn't have to go through what I had to go through, and which she will almost certainly have to go through at some point. So that's a little bit different than Medea, and Medea's killing her kids in the play Medea. She kills her kids largely because she is the one responsible for Jason being the hero that he is, right? Basically, his entire heroic work is really dependent on Medea. Medea did all the heavy lifting that made Jason a hero. And so she gave Jason everything Jason has. And by the end of the play, she is determined she's going to take it all back. And so she kills her kids as a way of getting back at her enemy, Jason. So there's a difference in tone there. But of course, the people in the 1850s may very well have looked at Margaret Garner as being very much like Medea in that she killed her child more than the reason why she killed her child, which, the idea of killing a child is awful, but considering what the effect of slavery and what a slave child is going to have to grow, live with once they grow up, one can see why a parent might think, better the child should die now rather than go through that living hell. That's a different sort of motivation for sure, but I'm not sure the people in the 1850s necessarily saw that. So that concludes chapter 11, and next time, chapter 12.